Jesus, I need you every moment. I need you here now. This grace, what hearts sing out your praise forever.
There's a famous, I think it's a Buddhist saying, guys. It says, "A journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step." And people love to say this whenever they're trying to do something big. Start with the little things, right? It is a good saying, okay? But today I would like to also say that a relationship, even a perfect relationship, even a friendship that will last for an eternity like ours. Remember, because even if it ends physically now, we will all meet again in heaven. And so our friendship, our relationship will last in eternity. Even a friendship or a perfect relationship that could last for an eternity starts with one meeting or starts with one meeting. And we know that as believers and as followers of God, we know that God is the one that brings these meetings together. And so I praise God and I bless God for bringing us together, for allowing this relationship to happen. This relationship, this meeting of ours that we've had, this connection is a blessing by God. It is not a coincidence. It is not by human choice, but it is God that brought us together to teach both of us, respectively, what it means to serve and to love Him, and to love one another as uh, children of God and servants of God. And so I want to focus on this, the fact that meeting is what's important, right? None of this, I could have never gotten to know you guys if we never met, right? You would never have gotten to know who I am if we never met. It's just not possible, right? It's not possible. You could read about someone, right? But to have a relationship with someone, to have a really close connection, to have a history with someone, you need to meet them. That's why meeting someone is so important in a relationship. Today, I want to remember Abraham. Okay, Abraham, guys, is called the father of faith. Father of faith, right? Father of our Christian faith. He's our father of faith. The one we look up to as an example of what our faith in God should look like. In other words, um, I don't know if you guys are even born during the 90s, but during the 90s, you guys all know who Michael Jordan is, right? In the 90s, when Michael Jordan was around, everybody wanted to be like Mike, like Mike, like Mike. They would even have commercials like Mike, be like Mike. Okay? But as Christians, we could say that we all should be or should want to be like Abe, be like Abraham, or be like Abram, because he was the epitome. He was the father of our faith. He was the one that showed us what it means to be a great person of faith. So the question today is, how can we be like Abe? Like Abe, right? How can we be like Abe? And so the study or the analysis of today, the question that we're asking today is, how did Abraham become the father of faith? How did he become such a great man of faith? How did Abram, a nobody, okay, a nobody from nowhere, become Abraham, the father of a mighty nation and the ancestor of David and the ancestor of Jesus himself, God himself, the Son of God? And the answer I'm going to give you guys today to get to the point is it's because Abram met God, or more correctly, because God came to meet Abram. In the church, in when we study about Abraham, we often remember that Abraham is called the father of faith for his willingness to sacrifice his own son for God. He was willing to sacrifice Isaac for God because God told him. And in the New Testament, we hear that Abraham, in this, he had faith that God would somehow even he would fulfill that promise that God said, I will make you into a great nation. He would even fulfill that promise. He still believed, even as he was about to kill Isaac. And that's why Abraham is called the father of faith. And we always study this. We talk about how great Abraham is and his great faith. But the thing is, we rarely remember his beginning, Abram, when he was Abram. See, when the Bible introduces men before Abram, especially, when they introduce people who are righteous, who become great men, like Noah, like Job, right? It always talks about, in the beginning, it says how righteous they were and that they believed in God and they called upon God. It's important. But with Abram, the man that God chose to be the beginning of his nation, his chosen nation, we don't see such an introduction, guys. What we see instead is we see a picture of a man surrounded by idol worshippers, and we see someone who is actually not blessed. We actually see someone who a lot of people would say is cursed. In Genesis chapter 11, verses 27 to 32, the section right before we get this blessing, right before God comes and calls Abram to go, right? I'll bless you, I'll do this, all of that, and then so go. Right before that, they give an account of Terah, which is the father of Abram. So let me read this, 27 to 32. This is the account of Terah's family line. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. Abram and Nahor both married. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Ishka. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. Terah took his son Abram, his grandson Lot, son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Abram, and together they set out from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to Canaan. But when they came to Haran, they settled there. Terah lived 205 years and he died in Haran. Okay, so what we need to understand here is that the Chaldeans of Ur, where they come from, where that city or that town, whatever, they were famous to be known as worshippers of the moon. Okay, we don't know if Terah, the father of Abram and his family, left Ur because they did not want to worship the moon. But the thing is, if you notice, it doesn't say anything. It doesn't say otherwise. It doesn't say they left because they wanted to worship God. So we cannot assume that Abram or his family worshiped God in any direct way. Also, it distinctly says that Sarai was childless. Childless, guys, childless. I know these days, not having a child is not a big deal, right? You can have your legacy and not have a child, doesn't matter. But in ancient times, in the times of Abram, not having a child is a curse. It's a curse. You're cursed by God if you don't have a child. Being childless literally meant that you had no future because all of your belongings and all of your wealth that you had made in your life would just simply go to someone else. You had no one to look after it, right? Remember, wealth is like flocks and herds and all the stuff you had. It's not like bank account, right? It's not cash. So if you didn't have someone to take care of that when you became weaker in your old age, then somebody would come and take it away. And when you got older and you became physically weak, there was no one to take care of you. You literally had no future. You were cursed. And so we could probably think that Lot went with Abram, okay, and he acted like Abram's son in a lot of ways because Lot's father, Haran, died early, right? And Abram had no son. So he was almost, maybe in a way, was adopted by Abram to act like his son. because he had no son. In that way, he had no sons. And look, and another thing that's interesting about the story is that Terah and Abram and Lot left for Canaan, but they don't even get there. They don't even get to where they're going. They just stop and they decide to live, okay, somewhere. And Haran is not a place that was already like a city that was booming. So they got there. Oh, this place is nice. Let's live here. No, we can kind of assume that they were going, and they just stopped and they started to live wherever they stopped, because the city or the place Haran, where they live, literally translates into roadside or somewhere on the way. Okay. So it was a city that they named afterwards. It's just a roadside place that they were going to Canaan, but they never made it. What is the complete picture of Abram that we get at this point then? Abram was kind of, in a way, he was a bit of a loser, guys. He was a kind of a loser. Okay? No child, didn't even make it to where he was going. Okay? Not even willing to take, concubines and stuff and make a family for himself. He just, he was fine just being whatever, how he was. He may have even left his town, because he wanted to get away from everyone's eyes and judgments, right? But he didn't even make it to where he was going. He just gave up and he was kind of content on living life, right? The point is that, you see, guys, Abram was not chosen because he was already righteous or already showed how faithful he could be. God came and spoke to Abram when there was no real reason to. It wasn't like Job or Noah. Abram never called upon God. Abram never worshiped God. Abram never sacrificed to him. God just showed up. And he said he blessed him, and then he said to go. Now, it is true that Abram would go on to show great faith by never giving up his belief and his trust in God. But it's because God came to meet him that Abram became Abraham. What was the driving force that made Abram into Abraham? Right? Just as a documentary about Michael Jordan shows, right? It was an insane need to win that made Michael Jordan into Mike. What was the drive that drove Abe? What drove Abram to stay faithful and true? Even to the point of sacrificing his own son. For in Abram's mind, Abram was not hesitating. He had every intention to kill Isaac on that altar when he raised that sword or raised that knife. What gave Abram such an insane belief in God's promise? And I say that driving force, that power, that insanity came from meeting God, meeting the Almighty God, coming face to face with the Maker. Because meeting with such an immeasurable force and power, Abram had no choice but to believe. Faced with the Creator, who he did not understand, but experienced. Abram did not understand, but he knew, he experienced God. Abram, what he did was he chose to believe his eyes. He chose to stay sane and believe what he saw and experienced, rather than reject that experience and say, I must be crazy. I must be hallucinating. I must be going crazy. Rather than saying, I must be going crazy, he decided to accept that experience. Now, imagine this, guys. All right? Imagine you're sitting in your porch, it's a nice day, and a car drives up, and out of that car steps Warren Buffett. All right? Warren Buffett. the person that everybody wants to eat with. Warren Buffett steps out of his car, comes to you and says, "Hey, I have some free time. Let's have lunch." Or let's say you're shooting around in your neighborhood basketball court or at the gym, and LeBron and his crew shows up. And LeBron comes to you and says, "Hey, let's play some one-on-one. I'll give you some pointers." Or you're on your phone, you're on your iPhone or on your Mac, and Steve Jobs, I know he's dead. Steve Jobs comes back from the dead and he comes to you and he says, "Hey, let's talk." Or you're doing, whatever. And I know you guys aren't a big BTS fan, but let's say BTS, or insert here whoever you're a fan of, right? Whatever singer, songwriter, artist, Hollywood person, okay? Insert here. Okay? They show up and and they say to you, "Hey, let's want to go for coffee?" How many of you or how many of us would refuse? How many of us would say, "Oh, you know what? I got plans. You know what? I wasn't planning to meet you today. I wasn't planning on that. I have other things in mind." How many of us would just reject such an invitation? Now, if we would be willing to do something because a human being asked us, right? What would happen if God showed up? That's the question. If God showed up at your door and you definitely knew it was God, not some figment of your imagination or hallucination, but physically and actually and really, if God just showed up at your door and said, "Go," I doubt there would be many of us who would have the courage, to say, "Hold on, let me think about it. I'm not sure if I have the plan. I'm not sure if my life plan fits you in." What I'm saying is that Abram became the father of faith because he met God face to face. Because God met with Abram left his father's house and he became his own man. He went to Egypt and he survived because really God showed up and saved his butt. And Abram had the chance to prove that he believed in God because God first came and met Abram. Without this meeting, Abram would have stayed a nobody, right? Without this meeting, we would not be talking about Abram. So let us not think that Abram would have become Abraham if God did not come and meet him and command him to go with his blessing. Let us not be so foolish as to think that Abraham would have been called the father of faith without first God coming to meet him and giving him everything he needed to believe. Let us not think that Abraham could have become such a person on his own. That it was in his own merits. And so more importantly, let us not be so foolish as to think that our faith, that our belief, that our trust in God is ours to make. The faith of the Bible, the faith in Jesus Christ, the faith of the gospel, faith in the Son of God, faith in the Father as our Father, such faith can only be given by God. It is not ours to create. It is not ours to make. Because this faith, the faith of the Bible, the faith of the gospel, the faith that we hold on to is not a set of religious beliefs. It is not an ideology. Faith is not following a certain list of rules and commands. Faith is a relationship. Faith is a connection with God, the Almighty. Faith is not possible, in other words, without meeting God directly. That's why in the New Testament, Jesus warns us, right? He warns us. that many will be rejected by him at the end. Even those people who come to Jesus and say, we did great things for you in your name. We even did miracles, Jesus, in your name. Even after leading praise teams, even after preaching in your name, even doing Bible studies, teaching Bible studies, even going on missions, even giving up everything, even bringing other people, witnessing to other people and bringing them to the church. Jesus can say, I do not know you. See, the important thing here, what Jesus says is that I do not know you. The important thing is that we know him. Not simply believe who he is, not simply believe what he is or that he does exist. Even the demons believe in that. Not believe in a certain religious creed or beliefs, system, ideologies, religion. Faith is knowing God, having a meeting with God, face to face, having a relationship with him. I want you guys to imagine this. I got my COVID shot yesterday, so my arm is like it's kind of painful right now. It doesn't hurt that much, but it does feel like I ran into something. So I had to drive out and go get my COVID vaccine yesterday. Let's say, what if I told you guys that on my way back from getting my COVID, right, in my car, I got run over by a semi, just T-drive, right, by a semi truck. And imagine I said, I got out of my car and I had to run back the rest of the way because my car was now a piece of, metal pancake. And then while I was running back, a satellite orbiting the Earth just happened to go offline. And it drifted off and it fell to the Earth and it hit me right on top of the head just as I was running. Now imagine I said, I told you guys that, and I said, I walked out of the crater and I had to walk kind of slowly the rest of the way because my shoes had melted off by the fire that was created by the satellite blowing up. And now imagine that I said, when I got home, there was a gas leak explosion. It blew up my house. And so needless to say, all my clothes were burned off. So it was, kind of embarrassing when I had to go to the mall and buy new clothes. Now imagine I told you this story. You would assume that I was either joking, right? Or that I was either lying or that I was crazy if I believed this. Or that I'm Superman. I'm Superman, right? Again, lying or crazy because we don't live in the DC universe and Superman doesn't exist. And now the question is this. If it is crazy to think that getting run over by a semi-truck and getting hit by a satellite or a gas explosion without having any physical effect on me, okay, if you think that's crazy, then I ask all of us, is it not crazy to think that you can get hit by something as big as God without having any effect? Why do we think that it is possible for us to become Christian without our past lives and the way we had lived being completely destroyed? Why do we think that meeting God could be an experience like any other experience we have in this life? If we ever meet our human idols, the people we look up to, we idolize, if we're a fan of anything, we would not forget for the rest of our lives. And yet, we have come to believe that we can meet the God of all creation and forget. I would say that we're either lying or crazy or just wrong when we say we actually met God and then live our lives like it never happened. If we say we're Christian and we don't live according to those words, then we're either lying, crazy, or we're just wrong that we actually met God. Many of us wonder, as we live our Christian lives, many of us in the church wonder why our lives lack the spiritual power and strength that is described in the Bible with people of faith and in the history of our church that we hear about. Why don't we have such faith that can move mountains, right? It says we could, Jesus said, if you have a faith of a mustard seed, right, the smallest seed, we can move a mountain. And even if we don't want to move a mountain because, that's not our thing, why is it that we don't live lives where our faiths are so strong that the pressures of this life and the pressures of this world doesn't shake us? Why don't we live with conviction? Why don't we live with faith? Why is our faith fake? Perhaps it's because we do not meet God. Some of you guys may have had this experience of meeting God directly. I'm not talking about the emotions here, okay? I'm not talking about the weeping and the crying and happiness and all of that stuff that people do on retreats. Okay, that's not faith. That's just an emotional response. It's a side effect. Okay, and such emotions actually and feelings can be reproduced. Okay, take a bunch of painkillers. You can do this. You can reproduce the same kind of emotions. What I'm talking about is that kind of strong conviction that you have in your heart and your soul, and passion and vision that you have from knowing that you are God's beloved child. The firm belief and faith that God was literally watching over you, He was really watching over you, that God really did have your back. And no matter what, no matter how this life you may even end up, God will make all things right in the end. God will make all things right in the end, as He promised in the Bible. If you had that experience, you know the kind of strength and power that comes from such faith. You experience what it felt to have God call you His child. Now, perhaps our religious lives, our Christian lives are so weak and so absent of such passion and affirmation because we stopped meeting God directly. Perhaps we got lost in all this religion and forgot to speak directly and honest with God Himself. Perhaps we forgot to speak directly and deeply with the Holy Spirit. Perhaps we stopped calling out earnestly to Christ Jesus. Perhaps we forgot that it is about meeting God. And those of you who have never experienced such conviction and passion and power of the truth of God, I say it's because you have not actually met God. The sad truth is, guys, the sad truth of our religion is that you can go your whole life. You can go your whole life calling yourself a Christian and having other people call you a Christian without ever having to meet God. You can go your whole life calling yourself a disciple of Jesus. You can have people call you a disciple of Christ without Jesus ever calling you His anything. Meeting God is no joke. It is not to be taken lightly. It is not something that we can just do whenever we feel like it. and think that it's not going to do something crazy to our lives. Meeting God is and must be a life-changing experience. If you think that a bug like us, an insignificant bug like us who's here one day and gone the next, can come face to face with the greatest source of power and energy of all existence without being completely blown away, you're just being foolish. Can we jump into the sun without being burned away? Can we jump into the volcano without being singed? Can you jump into the ocean without having to swim for your life? So how is it possible for us to meet one who is infinitely more brighter and hotter than the sun without being melted away? It's foolishness. Either you have met God or you have never met him, or you have rejected that meeting when he called you. Because this is the other side of the incredibleness of God and his gospel. It's odd and it's incredible and it's awesome because he has allowed insignificant creatures as us the freedom. The incredible thing is that God himself, the creator and keeper of the whole of existence, not just the universe, because who knows what's beyond it. That's all we know of, at least for now. All of existence. He chose us to be his children. He gave us the freedom to choose or not to choose him. If you even think about it for a second, it's mind-blowing. He allows us to say no to him. And we are the only creatures on existence that we know of that has that freedom, who can say no to God, their creator. We can either respond and say yes when he calls and so meet him for real, or we can say no, not yet. Same thing as no. Maybe, same thing as no. We can reject his meeting and we can reject any further meetings with him. That choice is ours. That's why it's faith, because we have freedom, absolute freedom to choose our own futures. That choice is what faith is. That's what choice is, faith. How did Abram become Abraham, father of faith? Because he said yes and he went. How did Moses become Moses, the man that we know, a man of God that we know, who was a friend of God, it said. No one else like him in all of history. Because actually he said no a bunch of times, guys. That's the funny thing. He said no, I can't go. But in the end, he said yes to God in the burning bush and he went. And how did David become David? How did Isaiah become the great prophet? Because he said yes when God called out, who will go for us? Who will go for us? Isaiah said, I will go. They all said yes. How did those random people that really were insignificant, how did those people become disciples and then apostles of the great Messiah? Peter, John, Luke, and even Paul. Great sinners who became apostles that we look up to now. How did they? Because they said yes when Jesus met them and he said, follow. They didn't think. They didn't ponder. They didn't look at their schedules. They just simply threw everything aside and followed. That's why they were chosen as the 12. Now, We might not have the luxury, guys, right? But we might think we don't have the luxury of God coming directly to us in the flesh. If Jesus came to us right now and he told us to come, we would follow. But we know that from experience that even if that happened, those who do not accept God will not follow. Because what we do have is the Spirit of God coming to meet us every day. I mean, coming to meet us whenever we ask. If we seek, if we knock, if we ask, he will answer, he will open. If we go closer to him, God will come closer to us. This is the promise of the Bible. The truth of our life is that we can meet God anytime we want. We don't have to wait for some retreat or some great revival. We can meet God at any time because the Spirit of God is with us. It's only because we let our excuses and we let the distractions of this world stop us that we do not meet God. Now remember, Abraham was nothing when God chose him. Nothing. He was a loser kind of, right? It does not matter what kind of person you are. It does not matter what kind of person you believe yourself to be. You can believe yourself to be the worst kind of person. You could actually be the worst kind of person. If you believe, that your life is not clean or holy enough or religious enough to meet God, it doesn't matter. When it comes to salvation, when it comes to accepting the gospel of the Bible, the gospel of truth, the gospel of mercy, it does not matter if you are a nobody or even a horrible nobody. And perhaps more important to some of us in the church, it also doesn't matter if you think you're a good person. When it comes to salvation, when it comes to being accepted in the mercy of the gospel, being saved by the blood of Christ on the cross, being a nice guy, being a kind person, like being a kind girl or boy, being a good person, living a clean religious life, right? Doing all those things that, nice, good people do. It doesn't matter. Remember what Paul said, it's all junk. It's garbage compared to the mercy of Christ. The only thing that matters is that you show up. That does matter. You need to show up. And what matters is responding and replying. What matters is calling out and accepting God's calling for you. Because anyone and everyone that God has called to himself, he will call. Anyone that God has called to himself will get a request from God at one point in their life. God will call. And what matters is whether we go, whether we reply when the call comes. How we reply, how we go is up to all of us because it is different how God calls us. But it always begins with a meeting with God, coming face to face with the Almighty and coming to face with who we really are before our Creator. So the only question I have at the end of all this is this. Do you want to meet God or not? And if so, what's stopping us? Let's pray.